The beginning of the Roman road. Chapter 1. A vast land of travel. The Roman Empire was enormous. Cities lay far apart, villages scattered like tiny dots on the map. Traveling from one place to another was not easy. Imagine merchants carrying goods, soldiers marching in armor, or messengers delivering urgent news. The land was wild, full of forests, rivers, and mountains. Paths were muddy and uneven. Wagons broke down. Horses stumbled. Travelers grew exhausted. People dreamed of a smoother way, a road that would not end in mud or collapse under rain. They wanted something strong, something straight, something that would last. The Roman leaders understood this. They knew that an empire could not survive without connection. Armies had to move quickly. Messengers had to reach distant towns. Trade had to flow. Without good roads, the empire would remain broken, scattered, and slow. Thus began the vision of the Roman road, a path that would bind the empire together. But visions were only the beginning. Building such a road would be long, heavy work.
Chapter 2. The Vision of Straight Roads. The Romans were not satisfied with winding paths. They wanted straight roads, like arrows across the land. Engineers stood on high ground, staring into the distance. They did not see just hills or valleys. They saw lines, invisible lines, that stretched far beyond the horizon. With measuring tools, ropes, and sighting poles, they marked the land. Straight roads meant cutting through hills, bridging rivers, and leveling uneven ground. But to the Romans, this was worth it. A road must be strong. A road must be direct. A road must never waste time. Villagers watched in amazement as men hammered wooden stakes into the soil, marking where the road would pass. Some thought it was impossible. Others thought it was madness. But the engineers believed otherwise. Slowly, a plan took shape. A line across the empire, drawn with human will.
Chapter 3. Gathering the workers. A vision was useless without hands to build it, and so the Romans gathered men, many men. There were skilled engineers who calculated depths and angles. There were surveyors who checked every line. But most were laborers, ordinary men with shovels, picks, and baskets. They came from villages, from towns, even from distant lands under Roman rule. The work was not glamorous. It was backbreaking. Men bent under the weight of stone. Sweat poured down their faces. Dust filled their lungs. Yet day after day they returned. Why did they work? Some for wages, some for food, some because they were forced. Whatever the reason, their hands shaped the road. Without them, the grand Roman dream would remain only a dream. The fields filled with voices, the ring of hammers, the scrape of shovels, the steady rhythm of labor. The empire had found its builders.
Chapter 4. Digging trenches slowly. The first real task was digging trenches. The trenches were not shallow ditches. They had to be wide, deep, and perfectly measured. A shallow trench meant a weak road. A crooked trench meant a crooked path. Precision was everything. Men lined up, shoulder to shoulder. Each carried a shovel or pick. At the signal, they began. Scrape, lift, drop. Scrape, lift, drop. The sound of iron on earth echoed across the countryside. One man scooped, Another carried, another dumped the soil into piles. Slowly the trenches deepened. Some places were easy, the soil soft and loose. Other places were hard, filled with roots or stones. When they struck rock, they hammered, chipped, and broke it piece by piece. Progress slowed, but it never stopped. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. The trenches stretched farther, longer, like scars across the earth. To passers-by, it looked endless, but to the Romans, it was only the beginning.
Chapter 5. Layering stones carefully. Once the trenches were ready, the true art of road building began. At the bottom of the trench, workers laid large stones. These were not smooth or polished. They were rough, heavy, and irregular, but they created a solid base. The men placed them carefully, one after another, until the ground was covered. On top of this, they poured gravel and small stones. These filled the gaps, making the layer firm. Then came broken tiles and pieces of rock, pressed down with wooden rammers. Each layer made the road stronger, tighter, more unyielding. Finally, the top layer was added. Smooth paving stones, fitted like a puzzle. Each stone was checked, adjusted, and hammered into place. No gaps were allowed, for gaps meant weakness. When finished, the surface shone under the sun. A cart could roll across it. A soldier could march for miles without stumbling. What had once been mud and dust was now something new, a Roman road, born of stone, sweat, and endless patience. The growing web of stone. Chapter 6. The weight of Roman order. The Roman Empire thrived on order. Everything had to be measured, organized, and controlled. The roads were no exception. Inspectors moved along the construction sites, checking every trench, every layer of stone. If a worker was careless, the inspector ordered the work torn up and done again. The Romans were strict because they knew a weak road today meant disaster tomorrow. Every mile had to match the standard width. Every bridge had to hold the weight of wagons and soldiers. Roads were not just for one city, they were for the empire itself. Order gave Rome power. For travelers, this discipline meant safety. When they stepped on a Roman road, they knew it would not crumble, sink, or collapse. The road was Rome's promise of reliability. And in the empire, promises mattered. Chapter 7. The endless labor of soldiers. Not all road builders were paid workers. Many were soldiers. When armies were not fighting, they were building. Strong hands that once held swords now carried picks and shovels. Generals believed this kept men disciplined, focused, and ready. Building roads was as much a part of military life as marching or drilling. Soldiers worked in ranks, each man given a task. Some cut stone, some carried gravel, some built bridges. Their camps rose along the roadside, tents lined neatly like miniature towns. By day they worked. By night they trained, guarded, and rested. For them, every road was a weapon. It meant faster marches, quicker supply lines, and swifter victories. They saw beyond the stones. They saw battlefields connected by lines of power. To Rome, soldiers were more than warriors. They were also the empire's builders, shaping not only conquests, but the very ground under their feet.
Chapter 8. Roads through rivers and hills.
Flat land was easy. Rivers and hills were not. When rivers blocked the way, bridges were built. Wooden beams, stone arches, or a mix of both rose above the rushing water. Engineers calculated angles, ensuring the bridge could carry the heaviest carts. Some bridges were temporary, others permanent, but all were strong. Hills demanded cutting and carving. Workers hacked through slopes, leveling paths straight into stone. At times, they filled valleys with earth and rock, raising the road until it was even. These were not small tasks. They required hundreds of men, months of labor, and endless patience. Yet the Romans never avoided difficulty. To them, obstacles were not barriers, they were challenges to be conquered. By overcoming rivers and hills, the Romans proved their determination. Their roads did not bend to nature. Instead, nature bent to their will.
Chapter 9. The Birth of Milestones. A road without measure was a road without meaning. The Romans introduced milestones, stone markers placed along the roadside. Each milestone carried inscriptions. It told how many miles lay ahead, which emperor had ordered the road, and sometimes even the names of engineers. Travelers could read them and know their progress. Soldiers could calculate their marches. Merchants could plan their journeys. The milestones also reminded everyone of Roman authority. Each stone whispered, "This road belongs to Rome. This empire belongs to Rome." Some milestones still stand today, silent witnesses of centuries past. They are small, simple, and unchanging, yet they once guided the footsteps of armies and emperors alike.
Chapter 10. The Roads Meet at Rome. All roads had one heart, Rome itself. The roads stretched outward like the spokes of a great wheel. No matter where a traveler began, they could follow the stones and find their way to the capital. All roads lead to Rome, people said, and it was true. Merchants brought goods from the provinces, wine, grain, silk, spices. Soldiers marched from distant garrisons back to their commanders. Messengers rode with scrolls sealed in wax, carrying news across the empire. Rome stood at the center, alive with voices, wagons, and footsteps from every land. The city's strength grew with every mile of road that connected it. The Roman road was more than stone. It was a network of life, binding people together, binding provinces together, binding the empire itself into one beating heart.
Life along the Roman roads. Travelers could not walk or ride forever. The Romans built inns and resting stations along the roads. These were simple buildings, often spaced a day's journey apart. Some offered beds, others just food and water. Horses could be fed, wagons repaired, and travelers given shelter for the night. Merchants carrying goods slept under the same roof as messengers carrying imperial orders. Soldiers on the move rested beside common villagers. Though different in purpose, they all shared the same roof and the same fire. The inns gave life to the roads. Without them, travelers might starve or freeze. With them, the roads became more than lines of stone. They became safe pathways, alive with hospitality and rest. Chapter 12. The Postal Riders of Rome. The empire needed speed. Messages could not wait weeks. And so the Romans built a postal system. At regular intervals along the roads, fresh horses waited. Riders carried leather pouches filled with scrolls and wax-sealed letters. They galloped to the next station, changed horses, and rode again. Day and night the system continued. An urgent message could travel hundreds of miles in only a few days. This speed kept the empire alive. A governor could report trouble in the provinces. A general could send news of victory. An emperor could issue commands across seas and mountains. The riders were unsung heroes, always moving, never lingering, carrying the words that bound the empire together.
Chapter 13. Merchants on the Move. Where there are roads, there is trade. The Roman roads became the arteries of commerce. Merchants loaded wagons with goods: grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, silk from the East. The wheels creaked, the horses strained, but the journey was steady. Markets in faraway towns filled with foreign wares. People tasted foods they had never known, wore clothes from distant lands, and admired objects shaped by unfamiliar hands. Trade was not only about wealth, it was about culture. Along the roads, languages mixed, ideas spread, and customs blended. The empire became richer not just in gold, but in thought and tradition. All this was possible because of the road beneath the wheels.
Chapter 14. Soldiers on March. The Roman army was feared not only for its discipline, but for its speed. The roads gave them wings. Columns of soldiers marched in perfect rhythm, shields flashing in the sun, boots striking stone with a steady beat. They could cover vast distances in days, arriving at trouble spots before enemies could prepare. The roads carried not only men, but also wagons of weapons, carts of supplies, and herds of animals for food. An army without roads was slow and weak. An army with roads was unstoppable. For enemies, the sight of a Roman road often meant dread. It meant that soldiers could appear suddenly, silently, swiftly. To Rome, the roads were not just paths, they were lines of conquest.
Chapter 15. Farmers and villagers nearby. While soldiers and merchants dominated the roads, farmers and villagers also relied on them. A farmer could load his cart with grain and take it to the nearest town. A shepherd could drive his sheep to market. Villagers could travel to festivals, fairs, and religious gatherings. For them, the roads were lifelines. They connected small, forgotten places to the wider empire. A villager walking the stones could feel part of something greater, an empire that stretched beyond the horizon. Children played near the roads, watching travelers pass. Old men sat by the roadside, telling stories of where the road might lead. Life in villages was simple, but the road tied it to the vast, unseen world of Rome.
The strength and glory of Roman roads. Chapter 16. Bridges across the empire. No empire could survive without bridges. The Romans knew this well. When rivers blocked the way, they did not turn aside, they built. Some bridges were wooden, quick to raise, useful for temporary campaigns. Others were grand structures of stone, meant to last for centuries. Arches curved gracefully above rushing waters, carrying wagons and soldiers across. These stone bridges were marvels of engineering. They could support incredible weight, withstand floods, and remain standing long after kingdoms had fallen. Travelers crossing them often marveled, not only at the road beneath their feet, but at the daring skill that had placed it above the water. The bridges became symbols of Roman pride. They showed that the empire could not be stopped by rivers, just as it could not be stopped by enemies.
Chapter 17. Aqueducts beside the roads. Roads were not the only stone veins of the empire. Aqueducts often stood beside them, carrying water to cities. From distant springs and hills, water flowed through carefully built channels. Arches supported the aqueducts as they stretched across valleys. The sight was astonishing. Stone pathways in the sky, water moving silently through them. Travelers on the road often walked beneath these arches, shaded by the greatness above. Farmers watered fields, towns filled fountains, and cities bathed in clean water, all because of these silent stone rivers. Together, roads and aqueducts showed the Roman genius. One carried people, the other carried life itself.
Chapter 18. The Law of the Roads. The roads were not wild paths. They were ruled by law. Roman officials made sure they were protected. Robbery was punished harshly, and soldiers often patrolled the routes. Milestones and markers reminded everyone that the roads were the property of Rome, not of bandits or petty kings. There were also rules. Wagons could not be overloaded. Bridges had weight limits, and some roads were reserved for imperial use. The order of Rome extended even to the stones beneath travelers' feet. Because of this discipline, people trusted the roads. Merchants dared to carry gold. Messengers rode without fear. Villagers walked with confidence. The law made the road more than safe. It made it Roman.
Chapter 19. Roads to the edges of the empire. The Roman Empire was vast, stretching across continents. The roads reached almost everywhere, into deserts, across mountains, and deep into forests. In the north, roads pushed into the misty lands of Britain. In the east, they reached Syria and beyond. In the south, they crossed the deserts of Africa, where caravans marched beside the stones. Each new road tied another province to the heart of Rome. Soldiers could arrive, taxes could be collected, trade could flow. The edges of the empire felt less distant, less wild. For the people living at these borders, the roads were proof. They were not forgotten. They too were part of Rome's endless reach.
Chapter 20. The Glory of Roman Power. At last, the roads became more than stone. They became symbols. They represented Rome's will, its strength, and its order. They told the world that Rome was not just a city, but a force that could shape nature, connect nations, and outlast generations. Travelers walking the stones often felt pride. They knew they were part of something larger, something that stretched across lands and centuries. To walk a Roman road was to walk upon the empire itself. And so, mile after mile, year after year, the roads carried not only wagons and soldiers, but also the very idea of Rome, the dream of a world united by stone and vision.
The roads in daily Roman life. Chapter 21. Markets along the roads. As the Roman roads spread, markets began to grow beside them. Small villages became busy trading spots. Farmers set up stalls with baskets of grain, vegetables, and fruits. Merchants displayed fabrics, pottery, and tools. Travelers passing through often stopped, buying or selling what they carried. Some markets grew so large that they became permanent towns. Roads gave them life. Without the steady flow of wagons and people, they would have remained small, forgotten places. For villagers, these markets were windows to the wider world. A shepherd could sell wool to a man from another province. A farmer might taste olives from distant Spain. Culture and trade mixed freely where the road brought people together.
Chapter 22. Pilgrims and Temples. Religion thrived along the Roman roads. Pilgrims walked long distances to visit temples. The smooth stones carried their footsteps, their prayers, their hopes. At famous shrines, offerings piled high, coins, figurines, carved plaques. Some temples even grew rich because the roads made them accessible to thousands of visitors. Priests built guest houses for travelers. Vendors sold food, charms, and souvenirs. The road gave faith a path, and faith gave the road a purpose beyond war and trade. Every pilgrim walking the stones became part of something spiritual, carried forward not just by the road, but by belief.
Chapter 23. Festivals on the Roads. The Romans loved festivals. Roads carried people to grand events in cities and towns. Crowds gathered for games, music, parades, and feasts. Travelers walked for days, their excitement growing with every mile. Some rode wagons decorated with flowers. Others sang songs as they marched. When they arrived, the roads around the city filled with tents and laughter. Merchants sold sweets and trinkets. Families reunited. Strangers became friends. The roads did not only carry soldiers and merchants, they carried joy. Without them, many could never have reached these celebrations. The road was not only stone, it was the thread that tied people together in shared happiness.
Chapter 24. The Burden of Taxes. But the roads also carried weight, the weight of taxes. Every province owed Rome money, goods, or labor. Tax collectors rode the roads, carrying scrolls and counting coins. Farmers pushed carts filled with wheat. Villagers marched with sheep and goats to pay their dues. The roads made this collection efficient. Governors knew exactly how much wealth could move along them. To many common people, the road was not always a blessing. It was a reminder of Rome's power, a path that led directly to the empire's hungry treasury. The same stones that carried merchants' goods also carried the sweat and labor of the poor. Chapter 25. Stories Beside the Fire. At night, when wagons rested and travelers stopped at inns, stories filled the air. Merchants spoke of distant lands, deserts filled with sand, and mountains covered with snow. Soldiers told tales of battles fought beyond the seas. Pilgrims shared visions of temples and gods. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining worlds far beyond their villages. Old men nodded, remembering journeys of their youth. The Roman road was more than a path of stone. It was a path of stories. Every traveler carried one, and every listener gained a new dream. The empire did not just live through soldiers and emperors. It lived through words spoken beside the fire, words carried on the road, words that never died. The Decline and Legacy of the Roman Roads. Chapter 26. Cracks in the Stones. Nothing lasts forever. Even the strongest Roman roads began to show cracks. Rain seeped into the stones. Weeds grew in the gaps. Wagons wore down the surface. In some places, neglect turned smooth paths into broken stretches of rubble. Where once soldiers marched swiftly, wheels now jolted and travelers stumbled. The empire had grown too vast. It became harder to maintain every mile of road. Some provinces repaired them, others abandoned them. The great network that once pulsed with life began to weaken. The cracks in the stones reflected the cracks in Rome itself. An empire is only as strong as its connections, and when those faltered, so too did its power.
Chapter 27. Roads in Times of Invasion. As enemies pressed against the borders, the roads carried both salvation and doom. Roman legions still used them, rushing to defend towns. But invaders also marched upon them, using the very stones Rome had built. Roads that once protected the empire now guided its enemies straight into its heart. Villages along the routes trembled as foreign armies appeared suddenly, swiftly, following the paved paths like uninvited guests. The Romans had created something too great, too permanent, and now others used it against them.
Chapter 28. Forgotten Roads, Silent Villages. After Rome weakened, many roads fell silent. Inns closed, bridges crumbled, milestones toppled. Grass grew over the stones. Villagers avoided the broken paths, fearing bandits and wilderness. Towns once filled with trade became quiet, their markets empty. Yet some roads survived in fragments. Farmers plowed fields beside ancient stones. Children played on abandoned bridges. A few merchants still walked the paths, though they were rougher, lonelier than before. The roads that had once bound the empire now seemed like scars of a lost age.
Chapter 29. Roads that outlived Rome. But not all was lost. Many Roman roads proved so strong, so well built, that they outlived the empire itself. Centuries later, kings and kingdoms still used them. Travelers still walked them. Merchants still rolled their carts across the same stones. Some roads became the foundations of modern highways. Even today, in parts of Europe, you can walk on stones laid by Roman hands 2,000 years ago. Rome itself may have fallen, but its roads endured, silent, steady, eternal. Chapter 30. The Endless Legacy. In the end, the Roman roads were more than engineering. They were memory. They told of armies marching, merchants trading, pilgrims praying, villagers traveling, and children dreaming. They told of power and pride, discipline and vision. They told of an empire that sought to bind the world together. Though Rome is gone, its spirit remains in the stones beneath our feet. Every modern road, every highway, every path that connects people echoes that ancient idea, that distance can be conquered, that nations can be linked, that humanity can be united. The Roman roads were not just roads. They were the empire itself, and their story never truly ends.